Okay, just to introduce Linda. So Linda's a project development analyst at the California State Coastal Conservancy and San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. Linda works for a state agency that funds and supports coastal resource protection and public access to the California coast. She also staffs a regional agency that does similar work along the lines of the Bay Area. In these roles, she gets to work at the intersection of conservation, government, and communities. Prior to joining the Coastal Conservancy and SF Bay Restoration Authority, Linda worked in a STEM and college access program in San Francisco. Linda graduated from UC San Diego with a BS MS in biology. Her identity as a Chinese American and first generation college student has shaped her experience in pursuing a career in the environmental field and her interest in advancing equity through her work. So thank you, Linda, for joining us today. And we are going to tag team a little bit on this presentation. I'm going to talk for the first 15 minutes, and then Linda will take over halfway through to kind of talk about what her agency is looking for in terms of grant writing. So let me share my screen. So we're going to go very briefly into grant writing 101. And the idea here is, you guys are putting together your presentations for plans, and we really want to see these plans being implemented. And one of the things that's going to be necessary in order to see these plans get implemented is that we're going to need to fundraise to get these happening. Grant writing is one of the major ways that we fundraise in the nonprofit world. So just to go over what we're going to review today, we're just going to do simple, what is a grant, who makes grants, and how to research grants. And then we're going to do a grant writing example from a particular grant. So grants are funds that are given by an entity. So it's frequently a public body, charitable foundation, or a specialized grant-making institution to an individual or another entity, usually a nonprofit, but sometimes a business or a local government, for specific purposes linked to a public benefit. Unlike loans, grants are not to be paid back. So I want to say it's free money, but no, you actually have to put in a lot of work to get grants. So it's not exactly free. It's just more you're putting in sweat equity to get it done. Who gives grants? So you can find grants that are come from government. So that could be on both the federal, state, and local level. Come from either private or public foundations, which we can talk a little bit more about, public or private trusts, and also from businesses. If you want to learn a little bit about the ins and outs, maybe even the kind of the dirty side of the grant funding organization, I highly suggest this book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. So this book outlines how most foundations were started. Foundations are essentially like rich people who have large amounts of money but don't want it to be taxed. And so they put it into a foundation where they're tax exempt, and then they take basically the interest from what they put into the foundation and they give it away to charitable organizations, usually nonprofits. But because they're the ones who are giving out the money to these nonprofits, they get to decide which issue areas get funded, which programs get funded, and basically they take that power away from the government organizations by taking their taxes out of government. This actually causes a lot of disjoint in the foundation and funding world, leading to the point where of all the funding nationally for environmental organizations, only 1.3% goes to environmental justice and BIPOC-led justice focus groups. So what that means in terms of overall money is that there's $1.3 billion going to environmental justice groups. Only 18 million actually goes for EJ organizations. So it makes it seem like for work that we're doing, it makes it feel like this funding is really hyper competitive, really scarce. But this is changing. So a group of foundations prompted by EJ organizations led by people of color have actually started making a pledge to put more money into EJ organizations. but we're still looking to see what the effects of that was going to be. So when you're searching for grants, there's a couple different places you can go. One, there are some grant databases that you can follow. So the Foundation Center, which is actually located in San Francisco, has a grant database that you can go and research. It does cost money. It's I believe it's on the order of about $180 a month. So, you know, if you're looking to use that grant database, it's really good if you partner with a nonprofit that can afford to pay for it and research through there. I also think if you go to the Foundation Center directly, you can use their grant database. Another one's called Grant Station. It's also a paid database, a little bit cheaper, I think, than the Foundation Center. And then grants.gov is a database for government grants that you can start looking up. If you just want to do an internet search, you can kind of research keywords, and there's like key buzzwords that are going around on the grant making space right now. Words like resilience, environmental justice, adaptation, disadvantaged communities can help you to really find like the grants that you're looking for in the field. I suggest that you maintain a list of recurring grants and grant making institutions. As you start searching for these grants, you find that a lot of them are annual grants. So anything that you didn't have a chance to apply to this year is probably going to come up next year. You know, we generally keep a spreadsheet of all the continuing grants that we have and when their grant deadlines are. So on an annual basis, we can know like what we want to be applying to. I also suggest signing up for mailing lists from different foundations and from different government organizations so that you can know as soon as they send out an RFP or a grant application to the community. So when you're writing grants, there's a couple key terms that we want to just clarify here. The first one's 501c3. So 501c3 refers to the legal entity of a nonprofit. Most nonprofits are 501c3, means that they're tax exempt, means that they can't lobby through government. But a lot of times that nonprofit and 501c3, those words will be used interchangeably. Fiscal sponsor. A fiscal sponsor is a nonprofit organization that has a 501c3 and kind of lends that 501c3 to another organization so that that organization can work similarly to a nonprofit, but without having to go through the legal documents of becoming a 501c3. So if you are a small organization just starting out, and you haven't filled out your 501c3 paperwork, which can take a really, really long time, or you need some help with accounting or other elements of running a nonprofit, it's often good to find a fiscal sponsor, and you can basically piggyback on their 501c3 to create your organization until you're ready to become your own 501c3. If you have a fiscal sponsor, then you are a fiscally sponsored organization. And that's key to know when you're writing grants, because some grants will give money to, and some agencies will give money for fiscally sponsored organizations and some will not. And if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you want to make sure you know that before you go and apply for a grant, whether or not they'll accept you. Matching funds is something that comes up commonly in government grants. It is when when a grant says, yes, we'll give you this amount of money, but you have to have an equivalent amount of money in the form of another grant or in the form of donated funds, sometimes in equipment. You have to have some sort of matching funds that can match what is going to be given to you. CBOs, I think we've heard a lot. That stands for community-based organizations. And these are often nonprofits, but not necessarily. They're just organizations that live and exist in a community, work with community members, and represent community members, or said to represent community members. Disadvantaged communities is a tag word that's thrown around a lot. It generally refers to low-income people of color, folks with disability, immigrants. I dislike this term, although it is the common term that's thrown around, because it doesn't really refer to what disadvantaged the communities. It's a little passive in its voice, but that is a common terminology that is used on grant applications these days, as well as frontline communities. Frontline communities like our communities are the folks who are going to be first and foremost hit when issues related to climate crisis are happening. So you have frontline communities in terms of sea level rise, which are folks who are at the at the shoreline, going to experience it directly. And then these last three terms, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, I think you guys have heard a lot in these different presentations, and I wanted to just make sure that we had an understanding of what these are. So these are often seen as different fields in the environmental field, like the field of mitigation, the field of adaptation, or the field of resilience. And what mitigation is it's like saying we have a problem and we think we can fix it, so we're looking to ways we can fix it. That's mitigation. So for example, we want to get carbon out of the air, so we're going to plant trees. That's a mitigation act right there. Adaptation is more like a problem is happening, but we are not sure we can fix it, so we have to adapt to it. And how are we going to adapt to it? So in sea level rise, maybe we put up sea walls. It's not stopping the sea level rise, but it's helping us to adapt to what's happening. And the field of resilience is defined as how do you return to normal after a disaster. So this is really what's happening when we have a problem, the disaster is hit, but how do we recover from it? So some local grant making agencies that I wanted to just tell you about are, the first is Measure AA, which is the grant that we are under for the Shoreline Leadership Academy. So this was a bond measure that allowed $25 million per year for Bay Area shoreline projects and habitat restoration, flood management, and public access. So they give very large grants away to folks who are doing these kind of projects along the shoreline. The next is transformative climate communities. So TCC is a multi-million-dollar grants given for community development. And yeah, there's two TCC grants, multi-million-dollar TCC grants in Oakland. One actually went to the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project to do a project in West Oakland. The other one went to, I believe, the East Oakland Neighborhood Initiative to do some development based on the projects that they were doing through Resilient by Design. Right now, TCC has gone through all of its rounds of funding, but the state is currently considering whether or not to put more money into the TCC grants. Prop 1 you might hear about is $7.545 billion for water projects, including surface and groundwater storage, ecosystem, watershed protection, and restoration and drinking water protection. And another possible grant is the EPA Small Grants program put out by Cal EPA, which allows for $75,000 for 1 year to go towards EJ projects in the community. These are all grants that we've been able to get in the past. So when you're writing a grant, there's generally 3 steps you need to hit before you get to the grant writing process. So the first is to do your research. So you want to do research ahead of time of researching the organization that's giving the grant, so you can kind of understand like what kind of grants have they given in the past, who have they given to. What you want to make sure you read through the grant application very thoroughly anytime you have a grant. In various grant applications, there's generally certain things that will disqualify you as you go along the way. So you want to make sure that before you even getting into any of the writing or any of the decision making on how to do your project, that you've read the application really thoroughly and make sure that your project aligns with what it is that they're asking for in the grant. When you're reading through the grant, if you have any questions whatsoever, you want to make sure that you write out all those questions and then take them to the next step, which is the webinar. So most grant applications have a webinar that they will do for the community so that folks can come and bring their questions, get more clarity on what they're looking for, and have a better understanding of what their proposal, whether or not their proposal matches with the grant application. So it's really, when you're doing this, it's really about matching the proposal to what it is that the grant making organization wants. Like developing a grant is like it's a compromise between what you want to do and what the grant making organization wants to do. So if the grant making organization has an idea that they want to do, well, let's say with Measure AA, they want to do EJ projects along the shoreline. If you come with them with a project that's not on the shoreline, then you're disqualifying yourself from being an applicant, which is actually what happened with the Shoreline Leadership Academy at first. I told you guys earlier that the Shoreline Leadership Academy is based on the Oakland Climate Action Network. And that was my original idea that I brought to the Measure AA, is that we would have a citywide project that would help work on shoreline issues, but also kind of get people knowing about different elements of the ECAP and getting people involved in environmental planning. But after going to the webinar, talking to the program officer, I found out that we could only do things focused on the shoreline. So then I tailored my project to be more shoreline focused, which goes into the next step, which is talking to the program officer. So I have to emphasize this point a lot, because there's no grant that I've ever written where I didn't talk to and develop a good relationship with the program officer first, and help to co-develop my program with the program officer. Program officers are incredibly important in the process. They will steer you clear of any pitfalls that you might fall into. They will make sure that your project is tailored to the needs of the grant. And if you get the grant, then they work with you to help implement it along the way. So speaking of that, let's see. Oh, wrong way. Hold on, going backwards. So we're talking, so I'm going to pass this over to Linda to talk about how to write a grant. We're going to use an example from the Community Grants Program, which is a subset of Measure AA that provides $100,000 grants to community-based organizations for smaller projects that they might want to implement. So Linda, do you want to take over?
Yeah, thanks, Phoenix. And thanks for that overview of grants and different potential fund sources. So as you all know, the community grants program and our regular grant round under the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority is a government grant. So it does come with, government rules and lots of requirements that you do have to follow. But I mean, it is substantial funding that you can get. And as Phoenix was saying, we really do try to work with you so that our program is meeting your needs while it's still meeting our legal requirements. So I'll just be talking about our community grants program this time. And this program is specifically to help support projects that are led by community-based organizations within economically disadvantaged communities. And I know there's issues around using that term, but yeah, it definitely isn't perfect, but it tries to get at the types of communities we're trying to support, because, historically, they have not been as well invested in.
Should I go next page?
Oh, yes, sorry, I was like trying to click on my side. Here's just a brief overview of what that process looks like. Again, this is just specific for our community grants program, so other grant programs may look different, but some of these will be similar. For this program, you can submit an initial application, asks for basic information about the project, schedule, budget, and then staff will get back to you to just have a conversation with you about the proposal and see if it's a good fit for our program, if our funds are even a good fit for what your ideas are. And then you'd get a chance to submit a revised application before our staff and our advisory committee members review it formally. And then if it's a proposal that we really want to move forward with, then we'll work closely with you to help flesh out the project so that we can actually bring it to our governing board meeting to have them say, okay, you can have this funding. Next, please. Yeah, so this again might be a little far off because I know you all are still, just brainstorming project ideas right now, but this will still help you really think through some of these project ideas. So the application asks for basic information first, like contact information, what the name of your project would be, where it's located. You'll notice it says organization under contact information. So for many government grants, we can't give money just to like an individual. Like you'd have to be associated with, say, like a nonprofit, or if you're just a group just starting off, you could have like a fiscal sponsor that is a nonprofit with 501c3 legal standing. And let's see. Yeah, so that's just some basic information. Next, please. And then you'll be asked to describe your project. I know you all have been talking about a wide range of project ideas, but for the Restoration Authority, we're really focused on nature-based solutions to nature-based adaptation to climate issues. So that's definitely something you want to be thinking about when you're looking at different funding. It's like what do these agencies really want to focus on? So again, for us, we focus on like restoration and nature-based solutions. So yeah, when you are describing your project, you want to think about like why do we need this project? Like what are the community needs and ecological needs that would be addressed through the project? And what are the major parts of this project? And what is your role going to be? Because many of these projects, especially if they're larger, they require a lot of partners. Like it's not just one organization that's doing everything. So think about like what your role would be. So an example of that would be, say, in your shoreline community, that there's flood risk, especially in the face of sea level rise. And there's an opportunity to do some habitat restoration, which would reduce some of that flood risk and provide some benefits for wildlife. And maybe that project is already underway, or maybe the planning stages are just getting started, but you really want to make sure that there's strong community engagement like throughout the whole process. And maybe you decide that that is the project you want to focus on. So you'd want to think about like what are some goals and outcomes you want. So do you want to be hiring and recruiting like a team of community members to be working on this project throughout? Do you want to be hosting community events? Maybe there's some educational workshops and some hands-on activities where people are really getting to go out to sites, and maybe they're doing some plantings of native plants along the shoreline, or they're helping to grow some of those native plants. Would there be a fair where community members get to learn about the restoration project and learn about ways to get involved? So yeah, it takes a bit of time to think through what you'd want. Next, please. And then just describing the site. If you know the current conditions of the site, both ecologically, but also the surrounding community, what are the demographics of that area? And then for this program, since it's targeted for economically disadvantaged communities, you can check out there are a lot of resources that map out those areas. So for example, Cal Environmental Screen, I know the Department of Water Resources has a map. The Restoration Authority also has maps. Next, please.
Oh, that's live.
not showing up, but a lot of grant applications will also ask you for like a schedule. So again, it takes a bit of work to like think through what do you want to be doing month by month, or every several months by several months, and listing it out by task and thinking through like when you'd be able to complete those. Next, please.
Well, let me see if I can.
Oh, well,
I don't know why.
that's
weird.
Yeah.
It was the best.
It's okay though. I can still talk about it.
Okay.
The application also asks for, your organization's history and qualifications. So do you have experience doing similar projects, or, do you have the relationships with other organizations who do have that experience? And, we recognize that not every community-based organization is strictly an environmental organization. So we also want to hear about what else do you do? Like, how else do you connect with your community members? And, how will that help make this project even more successful? Next, please. And then budget, that's like a whole separate beast that you have to think about. Who's going to be working on this, and how much will they get paid? Are you going to provide stipends for community participation, which is a lot of agencies are realizing that's, more and more agencies are realizing that's really important. So what supplies would you need? Would you need translation services, etc.?
Oh,
And here's just a quick example of what a budget overview might look like. You'll see that it's broken up by major tasks. Within each task, you would of course have a lot more, details of like what the project development and implementation actually looks like. Is that implementing a curriculum? Project participation that might include stipends for participants, etc. And project partners, this is really important on the funder side, because we want to see that these projects are going to be successful, and usually they're more successful if you have a lot of buy-in and investment from partners who do have expertise that maybe like your organization doesn't have. There's a point on this slide that says ask for permission to include organizations into an application, and that is super important because you don't want to I guess you don't want to exaggerate and say that you have a partnership with and organize a CBO on this project, and then they find out that you listed them and they're like, no, we don't even support this. It's like really important to have that conversation with the different organizations if you want them to actually collaborate with you on these projects. And community involvement, this is related to project partners. We also want to see that sometimes an agency might get wrapped up in this one idea and they want to forge ahead with it, but there's not even that much support for it from the community members. And so we want to see that like you've done your work to scope out whether this is something that like people want, like are people involved in this, or if you're just like a new project starting up, like how are you going to get input on this from community members, and like how, like, are you flexible? Can you take that input and really make your project better?
Okay, thank you.
That's all for us.
Okay, we're at 5 o'clock. I just want to ask if there are any questions about that. Did anybody have questions about grant writing in general?
I have questions.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Okay, so when you say nature-based, does that include like something like education, what do you call that, awareness and education on our natural environment, and does it include that?
Yeah, actually, for our funding, we can include educational components as long as there's also some tie into like something that can actually happen on the ground. So an example of this would be like this program. There's a lot of like educational components about this project, but the goal is to come up with something that can be, actually done like in the future, in a future phase. So there's that tie. When I say nature-based, well, like Phoenix gave an example of like, building a seawall. So a lot of times like that's like hard gray infrastructure, and we want to see some new techniques that like, maybe you don't need to have a seawall there. Maybe you can have more like tidal wetlands, that are like greener, like quote unquote softer techniques. Or if you have a seawall, like, are there ways to also add some habitat value to that? Maybe you have like, you add grooves texture to the wall so that, organisms can, attach to it and like grow. So that's what I meant. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. So you're saying that if it was an educational component, there would still have to be some sort of like work done on the environment, some tangible work done on the environment.
Right.
Grant.
Some tangible work that is done, or it will lead to something tangible.
And can these are 1-year grants, can they be spread out into like 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, there's no time limit for these right now, but I think what we've seen is they're usually like a year to 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is it possible for a person, a applicant to, because we don't have any, like, neither, I don't know, but I don't have a 501c3. Could we go under a fiscal?
Yeah, for us, we definitely do work with you. If you're like, if you're a group and you don't have that like nonprofit status, you can definitely work with another nonprofit, and we're totally willing to support that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question, if I may ask.
Mm-hmm.
Under your listings of entities that qualify for grant, under the 501c3, do religious institutions fall under that category? And if they do, can they also be fiscal sponsors?
I don't know if I know this.
So I didn't quite catch the question. Was it?
There's asking if religious institutions are entities that can receive grants as well.
Oh, well, for sure they can be a partner. I think, I'm sorry, I think I need a little more detail, like about
the
actual organization.
Okay.
I can get back to you though. Yeah,
okay,
maybe if we.
Good. But just to clarify, my question is that are religious institutions like a mosque, church, a temple, do they fall under 501c3?
Oh.
And if they do, and they also be fiscal sponsors for projects like discussed?
I don't think that religious institutions are 501c3s.
I don't know either.
Let me see.
They're a different one. But they are a tax exempt.
Yeah, it depends on how they're structured, and also, because there's a lot of also churches that have subsets that are affiliated with the church that are 501c3.
That's true. Yeah.
So it really depends. You have to find the organization and look them up and see if they are a 501c3. You can't make a blanket statement if they are or are not.
I see. Okay, whichever one of them falls into that category that you just said, Scott, and they in turn be physical sponsors for somebody else?
If they are a 501c3, then they can be fiscal sponsors, yes.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I do have one last one, I'm sorry. Do you have any I'm sorry, do you have a list of programs that you have funded already that we could actually see so that we could kind of
Yeah.
fall in line with, see if our projects fall in line with the ones that you've already funded?
For sure. I could put a link in the chat right now, and I could also share it with Phoenix, so
Okay.
that can be shared with you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone for.
If folks are interested, I'm going to put in the application that we did for the Shoreline Leadership Academy. So you can read through that and see how we wrote our application, just as a grant writing example.
Yeah, I'll have to say the one that Phoenix submitted was a lot lengthier than our community grants application now.
I did really long reports.
But yeah,
Isn't there a word limit?
Yeah, I mean, our community grants program is also newer. So I think Phoenix, you might have submitted it before we even like created that separate program. Yeah, we do have, we say, oh, please keep it within like these many pages. So yeah. Yeah, thanks all for your questions and for chiming in.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording for